The fighting in Berlin continued into the evening, but with each passing hour the order to surrender was spreading through new city neighborhoods. More and more Germans stopped firing and came out of basements, bomb shelters, ruins and subways, sewer hatches. In torn overcoats, disheveled, overgrown with stubble, they came out with white armbands on their sleeves. The Soviet soldiers shouted, "Hand hoch!" The Germans threw down their weapons and raised their hands up as high as they could. Some threw their automatic rifles with an angry expression on their faces, others simply complied with the demand, others went mad. They cried or laughed hysterically. Some units marched to the surrender points as if on parade, their officers saluting and handing over their pistols. The prisoners were organized into huge columns and marched out of Berlin to sorting camps, and from there to Siberia or to dismantle the ruins of Soviet cities. On May 2nd, many German officers signed hundreds of demobilization papers and only wasted their time. Because men in any uniform, firemen, policemen, letter carriers, Soviet patrols joined the columns of Volkssturm, Hitler Youth and military men marching eastward. Soviet soldiers descended into basements and subways, searching hospitals for SS soldiers. Russians screamed, poking Germans with the barrels of their automatic rifles. For crimes in the Soviet Union, SS soldiers were expected to be shot or escorted away, so all the elite soldiers who remained in Berlin got rid of their uniforms and documents. Many SS soldiers were helped by the fact that they were not Germans, because Berlin was defended by European parts of the SS. And also, the NKVD organs learn about the tattoo under the arm of the SS soldiers only in the summer. Frenchmen of the battalion of the division Charlemagne pretended to be French workers and managed to get out to the west. A couple of Russian battalions also left with them. The Swedes of the Nordland division took refuge in the Swedish embassy. Some passed themselves off as Wehrmacht soldiers and escaped on their way east. The chaos and joy of the victors allowed many Hitler Youth teenagers who burned Soviet tanks in Berlin to escape Siberia. Young Nazis or parents managed to persuade the convoy to let the stupid kids go home. Soviet doctors and nurses gave first aid to the German wounded, pulling them out of the ruins. Covered with soldiers' blankets, they lay in the streets, waiting to find a place in the overcrowded hospitals. And civilians covered the faces of the dead with pieces of rags and newspapers, then lined up at Soviet field kitchens. On that day in Berlin, as before in other European cities, everyone showed what he was worth. Some Berliners pointed their fingers at German soldiers hiding in their basement, or rushed to the commandant's office with a portrait of Lenin in their hands. And others saw the captured soldiers off, sharing the last of their bread, smiling and cheering come home. Someone found a husband, a son, a father, and the whole family walked alongside. Toward the German outcome was moving to Berlin the great Soviet victory. At 12 o'clock in the afternoon on the Guards Regiment of the 47th Division received the last order, rest. By tomorrow put yourself in order, and then the rumble of the hushed battle began to drown out the roar of absolute happiness. Hundreds of fighters fled to the center of the Tiergarten, to the Triumphal Column, to the Reichstag. The stream of fleeing people and humming equipment grew and grew, turning into a screaming, kissing, crying river. Shouting, crying, hugging or singing songs. One soldier ran with everyone together. He ran past a self-propelled machine gun methodically pounding into a house where one German unit would not surrender. He ran past a dead German woman lying on the sidewalk, her eyes filled with endless grief. He ran past a wounded soldier sitting on a bench and kissing a nurse. He ran past dozens of Soviet tanks, from the trunks of which were sticking out armfuls of flowers that turned the formidable tanks into trees blossoming in spring. He ran past circles of songsters and dancers dancing and singing to the harmonica. Past soldiers rocking commanders, past commanders rocking soldiers. The soldier just ran and shouted with happiness, and thousands of rockets and tens of thousands of bullets flew into the sky, not to kill, but just so, because they were no longer needed. The soldier ran, reached the charred Reichstag, sat down nearby and without being ashamed of anyone cried. He suddenly realized that he was alive and that life goes on. He remembered that people were created not only for war, that besides fear and hatred there is love and hope. And that in the earth you can not only bury the dead, but also grow bread. And then he wiped his sleeve and wrote on the Reichstag, Stalingrad, Berlin. A private has reached Berlin for all. The first rays of sunlight illuminated a street littered with dead, broken stones, the mangled remains of cars. He smoked, watching as the surviving SS men were herded and shot against a wall, herded into a column of the others and driven away. Soon the radio crackled, and the remnants of the Guards Rifle Battalion marched to a huge stone church nearby, where the fighting continued. Here, Soviet tanks were burning near broken anti-tank guns. German artillerymen lay scattered around them. In the distance, a pair of self-propelled vehicles were firing direct fire at the church. The resounding blows of the guns overlapped the rumble of battle, but in the intervals between the cannon volleys German machine guns crackled silently, and twin lines of bursting bullets. Here in the ruins of the church there were 200 Latvian SS troops. They did not want to surrender, although they had already offered twice. The clanking of tracks was heard, and Stalin's tanks appeared. The heavy machines filled the small square in front of the church, stopped, and slowly raised the huge mouthpieces of their guns. A propaganda car with loudspeakers on the roof drove out next. "The garrison of Berlin has surrendered, cease firing," said the radios, and the Guards battalions ceased firing. German soldiers sounded in German from the speakers. Tonight the commandant of Berlin signed the order to surrender the garrison. Listen to his order. The voice of General Weidling was heard with the order to lay down their arms and surrender. The SS men listened to the words in absolute silence, but as soon as the speakers fell silent, they opened fire and bullets whistled through the air again. 20 heavy tanks deafeningly rumbled a volley, and the soldiers were bombarded with red-hot air. Heavy shells hit the walls and corners, shattering the church, then another tank volley and the tall church shrieked, crouched, the roof fell inward, to the sad clangs of falling bells. Everything was covered with concrete dust, but the soldiers saw a bayonet white rag crawl out of the smoke and dust of the church's basement window and ripple weakly on the sidewalk. There was silence. The soldier hesitantly took a step forward into the open street. Then he stopped, took off his helmet and cap, and wiping his sweating forehead, he smiled confusedly and happily. Really, the victory had come. Around hugged white as chalk fighters, beating the cement dust off each other with claps on their backs. The grimy tankers flew upward in grateful embraces. Then the radio crackled again, and the remnants of the battalion stomped into the Tiergarten to accept the surrender of the air defense tower. Here is the concrete hulk of the tower, a real medieval fortress, a 5-story building made of reinforced concrete with small windows battlements. At the corners semicircular towers, ending at the top with platforms with powerful anti-aircraft guns. German soldiers are coming out of the steel doors a meter thick. Grimly turning away or smiling ingratiatingly, they throw their weapons into a huge pile and line up in a column to leave under escort. And when all the Germans were out, the Soviet soldiers went inside. On the 4th floor, an SS general refused to surrender. In the air defense tower the elevators were working, the electricity was burning. It was a well-equipped shelter, with water and food supplies, ventilation and heating. On the 3rd floor was a hospital, thousands of wounded and dozens of doctors. Here a soldier got tangled in the hanging sheets and went straight into the operating room, where a surgeon was sewing up the wound of a German officer. The doctor threw the scalpel and recoiled in fear, but the soldier said Hitler kaputt and went out not to interfere. On the 4th floor, the soldiers were breaking down a closed door. As the soldier approached them, he heard 2 muffled shots, and when the door flew off its hinges, he saw a small office with an iron table, a chair and a bed against the wall. On the bed lay a dead general with a handsome face wearing an SS uniform and the Knight's Cross. The general's right hand was clutching a black Walther, His left hand was embracing a young, beautiful German woman in a uniform skirt and snow-white blouse with a Nazi party badge. Her tunic with SS runes neatly folded on a chair, her plump painted lips blue, they were drawn up in death. At the general's feet stood a started bottle of champagne. "So much for building their 1,000-year Reich," someone said loudly, and the fighters hurried out. The platoon climbed to the roof of the air defense tower. Heavy anti-aircraft guns stood with their barrels lowered, the breech blocks were blown up. The soldier for the first time saw the whole of Berlin, the gray, burning, broken city, saw the blazing fires, flashed explosions and gunshots. Somewhere there was still a battle going on. The silhouettes of dozens of planes could be seen in the sky, dropping bombs somewhere. The multicolored lights of tracer bullets stretched into the sky. But below, more and more people were taking to the streets, some defeated, others victorious. It was pouring rain over Berlin, and the guardsmen caught the drops with their lips, exposing their weary faces to the coolness of the rain.